Imagine for a moment that you are standing before a doorway you have passed 100 times before, yet never truly noticed. It is unmarked, unassuming, and for years you have walked by without so much as a second glance. Today, for reasons you can't quite explain, you pause. There's a stillness in the air, as if the world is holding its breath. Somewhere deep within, you sense that this is not just a doorway, it is the entrance to a part of yourself you have kept locked, perhaps out of caution, perhaps out of habit. As Emmet Fox once taught, Scripture, when viewed through the right lens, is not a dusty archive of moral tales. It is a living architecture of mind, a set of maps that chart the unseen territory of thought, feeling, and will. It is written in the language of symbols, metaphors, and patterns that speak directly to the subconscious. To the casual reader, it is history or poetry. But to one who knows how to listen, it becomes a personal guidebook for transformation. So, before we journey inward, I invite you to like and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with your soul. You step forward, you push the door open, and it yields easily, as if it has been waiting for you all along. Inside, the air is different. You feel it in your chest the way a room changes when it has been prepared with intention. There is nothing mystical for show here, no theatrics, just the quiet awareness that you have crossed a threshold. This is the inner sanctuary, the place where the real work begins. And here, in this space, every fragment of Scripture you've ever heard is no longer just words. It is circuitry. It is wiring. It is a deliberate system for aligning the currents of your mind with the principles that govern all life. Fox's genius was to strip away the superstition and dogma, revealing that the so-called miracles were demonstrations of law as unchangeable and impersonal as gravity. If you meet its conditions, the result follows. If you don't, it does not. This understanding puts the responsibility squarely in your hands, not as a burden, but as the clearest invitation you will ever receive. The first step is to stop reading Scripture as if it were aimed at someone else. Every character, every scene, is a reflection of something within you. The deserts and rivers, the storms and gardens, the kings and beggars, all are states of mind. To read with this awareness is to take possession of the material. Suddenly, the promised land is not a geopolitical territory, but a mental state in which your faculties work in harmony, and your life reflects that order. Of course, this demands a certain courage. It is far easier to keep Scripture at arm's length, to admire it from a safe distance. When it is personal, it becomes a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. You see where your thoughts are inconsistent, where your actions betray your stated values, where your hidden fears quietly run the show. This is not an exercise in guilt, it is an act of reclamation. The truth you uncover here is the same truth that will set you free. This is why the sanctuary is not a place of escape, but of engagement. You are not here to retreat from the world, but to recalibrate your presence in it. The words you will study are not meant to be memorized for recitation, they are to be metabolized. They must become part of your very blood, until the way you think, speak, and act naturally expresses the principle behind them. Interpreting Scripture through the spiritual lens Fox offers is like learning to read code. At first, you see only the surface characters on a screen. But when you begin to grasp the logic underneath, you can alter the sequence, refine the structure, and watch as the output changes before your eyes. Your life, in this analogy, is the program. Scripture provides the syntax. Your consciousness is the compiler. And here's the crucial point. The compiler does not care what you feed it. Just as a computer will process flawed code without judgment, your subconscious will accept whatever impressions you impress upon it. If you feed it the language of limitation, fear, or resentment, it will faithfully produce corresponding conditions. If you feed it the language of truth, order, and sufficiency, it will just as faithfully manifest those. This is why the journey ahead matters. You are not here to collect spiritual trivia or to impress anyone with your knowledge. You are here to learn how to write clean code for the mind. You are here to understand the architecture of thought so well that when you speak a word inwardly, it is aligned with law, supported by conviction, and carried into form without friction. You will notice as we go further that this work does not flatter the ego. In fact, it dismantles the ego's illusions with precision. Where the ego seeks control through force, principle offers control through alignment. Where the ego demands immediate results, principle insists on sequence and order. And where the ego clings to the identity of the seeker, principle calls you to step into the role of the demonstrator, one who applies, not just aspires. Standing here in this sanctuary, you realize the door you just crossed is not a one-time passage. It is a choice you will make again and again, sometimes a dozen times in a single day. Each time you choose to interpret your experience through principle rather than reaction, you reopen the door. Each time you refuse to outsource your authority to circumstance, you deepen your footing inside. And with each choice, something subtle yet undeniable shifts. You begin to recognize patterns faster. You recover from setbacks more cleanly. You waste less time rehearsing old hurts. You stop arguing with reality and start shaping it. In the chapters of your life that lie ahead, you will encounter storms and stillness, lack and abundance, closed doors and open ones. The difference will not be in the events themselves, but in the lens through which you see them. That lens, polished by truth, disciplined by practice, will reveal possibilities where once you saw only walls. This is the hidden truth Emmet Fox spent his life sharing. You are not a passive recipient of life's script. You are the interpreter, the translator, the one who decides what each line will mean in the context of your own mind. And as meaning shifts, so too does the shape of your world. You close your eyes for a moment, not to withdraw, but to anchor this awareness. The sanctuary is within you, always one conscious step away, and the doorway, unmarked and unassuming, will be there whenever you choose to enter again. You carry the stillness of that sanctuary forward, and now the path narrows into something more precise, a direct encounter with one of Emmet Fox's most essential teachings, the law of mental equivalence. This law, though simple in statement, is profound in consequence. It says that the conditions of your life always correspond in exact proportion to the mental pattern you hold about yourself, others, and the world. There is no partial application. There is no exception clause. Life, like an unerring craftsman, shapes the outer from the inner blueprint. Whatever you consistently believe, not just wish for, becomes your lived reality. That belief is the mental equivalent. And if the life before you today seems cluttered, contradictory, or incomplete, it is only because the blueprint you've been carrying holds those same contradictions and gaps. This is not about self-blame. Blame, in fact, is useless here. The purpose of this law is not to shame you for past designs, but to awaken you to the fact that you can alter the blueprint at will. You can draft a new pattern, one that matches the life you now choose to live. Think of it like this. If you were building a house, you would never hand the architect a crumpled napkin sketch, drawn in haste, and then grow angry when the finished building looked nothing like the mansion you imagined. Yet, in mental life, we often do exactly that. We feed the mind fragments, half-formed intentions, unexamined fears, stray complaints, and then wonder why the results feel disjointed. The law of mental equivalence does not respond to isolated bursts of positive thinking. It responds to the prevailing pattern. This means your casual assumptions, the tone of your inner dialogue, and the images you rehearse without even noticing. All of these carry more weight than the affirmations you speak for 5 minutes each morning. Fox often illustrated this with practical clarity. If you want a better job, you must first hold a clear equivalent of yourself in that position, not just in title, but in confidence, skill, and authority. If you want improved health, you must carry the equivalent of a body that functions with energy and ease even before the outer signs appear. It is not enough to say, "I want this." You must live in the thought atmosphere of, "I have this," without strain or pretense. This is where most people stumble. They try to believe something while keeping the old pattern running in the background. But the subconscious does not respond to words alone. It responds to the composite impression of belief plus feeling plus assumption. If the stronger signal is doubt, fear, or resentment, the blueprint remains unchanged, and so does the result. To work with this law consciously, you must first identify the mental equivalent you are carrying right now. This requires honesty without dramatics. You look at your current conditions, not as verdicts from the universe, but as photographs of your inner climate. The finances, relationships, health, and work you see around you are mirrors. They reveal the patterns you've been projecting. Some may please you, others may unsettle you. All of them are feedback. Once you see the pattern, the work becomes twofold. Dissolve the equivalents you no longer want, and deliberately construct the ones you do. Dissolving is not about fighting or resisting the old image. It's about starving it of attention. You refuse to feed it with worry or rehearsal. Each time it rises in thought, you acknowledge it, release it, and turn toward the new pattern. Construction, on the other hand, is active. You build the new equivalent in detail, engaging every sense and emotion. You picture it in your mind as if it were an established fact. You let yourself feel the satisfaction, the relief, the gratitude of already living it. You speak about it not with desperate insistence, but with the easy confidence of one describing something familiar. And here's the subtle art. You must keep the new equivalent alive without falling into anxious checking. Just as a gardener plants seeds and then tends the soil rather than digging them up to see if they're growing, you must let your new mental image take root in its own season. Overwatering with doubt will only disturb the process. As days pass, you will notice small, perhaps almost imperceptible shifts. Opportunities you might have overlooked suddenly catch your attention. Conversations tilt in your favor. A solution that seemed blocked last month now feels obvious. This is the law at work, not in some dramatic burst, but in the quiet, orderly unfolding that characterizes true creation. The more you practice, the more you will see that this law is not mystical in the sense of being unpredictable. It is mystical only in that it operates below the threshold of ordinary awareness. But its logic is exact. It gives to you exactly what you hold as your mental equivalent, no more, no less. And because this is law, it also works in reverse. If you allow images of lack, failure, or conflict to dominate your inner scene, the law will not protect you from their outworking. It is impartial. This is why Fox urged students to take control of their mental equivalents, not in a mood of fear, but in the sober recognition that the choice is always yours. As you begin to apply this consciously, you will find that your standards rise not just for what you will accept in your outer life, but for the quality of thought you entertain in private. You become less tolerant of mental clutter, not because you are forcing positivity, but because you value clarity. You see that the inner pattern is the only true leverage you have, and you guard it accordingly. Over time, this vigilance becomes second nature. You do not need to force the mind into constant strain. You simply hold the equivalent steady, returning to it when you notice yourself drifting. This steadiness, more than any burst of enthusiasm, is what brings the blueprint to life. In this way, the law of mental equivalence becomes not just a principle you understand, but a discipline you embody. And as the blueprint refines, so too does the life it produces, until the two are indistinguishable, and you live each day as proof of the law you have learned to trust. When you begin to see that your outer life is the mirror of your inner blueprint, the next question becomes, how do you read the language of that blueprint in the first place? This is where the art of interpreting sacred symbols becomes indispensable. For Emmet Fox, Scripture was a gallery of symbols, living pictures that speak directly to the deeper layers of mind. And unless you learn to read these pictures, you remain trapped in the surface story, missing the structure beneath. The mistake most people make is assuming that the stories were meant to be read literally, as if the events they describe were the only meaning they hold. But when you approach them symbolically, the landscape changes entirely. You discover that every location, every object, every character, and every action in a passage is a piece of psychological architecture. Take, for example, the idea of a mountain. In symbolic reading, a mountain often represents a higher state of consciousness, a place of clarity above the noise of daily life. Climbing the mountain is not about physical exertion. It's about elevating your perspective until you can see the bigger pattern. The desert might symbolize a period of spiritual dryness, where outer resources seem scarce, but inner resources are being tested and strengthened. These symbols are not fixed in meaning, like entries in a dictionary. They are relational. Their meaning emerges in context, just as the same word can mean something different depending on the sentence. A river might mean the flow of life or thought. Crossing it might represent a shift in identity or the act of moving from one mental state to another. You read not with a rigid code, but with sensitivity to the scene as a whole. Fox's method was straightforward. Take a passage, strip away the proper names and historical specifics, and then read it as a description of a process within your own mind. Who or what is this king in you? What is this enemy thought that must be overcome? What is the treasure hidden in the field? The moment you ask these questions, the text stops being remote history and becomes an intimate map of your own inner life. This shift in reading is not about clever interpretation. It is about reclaiming relevance. When you see a parable as your own experience in coded form, you naturally begin to ask, how does this apply right now? What is my Jordan River today? Where is the wilderness in my thinking that needs to be cultivated into a garden? The more you practice, the more fluent you become in this symbolic language. You'll find it popping up everywhere, not just in scripture, but in your dreams, in literature, in art, even in the phrases you or others use in casual speech. Life itself starts to feel like a text written in symbols, and you become an active reader. This kind of reading demands attention. You can't skim a symbol and expect it to yield its meaning. You need to slow down, not in a meditative trance, but in a grounded, investigative way. You look at the parts, you sense their relationship, and you see how the scene mirrors a current process in your life. It's worth noting that this is not about overcomplicating things or looking for meaning where none exists. A symbol is useful only if it illuminates a principle you can act on. If your interpretation leaves you with nothing to apply, it's just mental decoration. The goal is always to draw out something you can translate into thought and behavior now. And here is where the real power lies. Once you see the principle inside the symbol, you can work with it directly. If a passage shows you the value of persistence in the face of doubt, you can practice that persistence today in your work, in your health, in your relationships. The story becomes a living template, not a static tale. When you read in this way, you stop approaching Scripture as a seeker begging for answers. You approach it as a builder, collecting blueprints. You no longer ask, "What does this mean?" in the abstract. You ask, "How can I build with this today?" That subtle shift moves you from theory to practice, from inspiration to construction. Over time, the symbolic reading becomes a habit of perception. You'll notice that when challenges arise, your mind instinctively frames them in symbolic terms. This is my crossing of the Red Sea. This is my time in the cave. This is the stone I must roll away. The framing doesn't trivialize the challenge, it gives you a structure for engaging with it. And perhaps most importantly, symbolic reading keeps the work personal. You can no longer hide behind the excuse that this was meant for someone else in another time. You see that every line is a mirror. Every character is an aspect of you, Every conflict and resolution is a rehearsal for the inner choices you face now. This is why Fox's approach remains timeless. It turns sacred text into a practical manual. You are not asked to accept it blindly or reject it wholesale. You are asked to read it as if it were written for you, because in a very real sense, it was. When you master this lens, you no longer wander through life as a passive observer of symbols. You walk as their interpreter, their translator, and most critically, their implementer. And once you can read the blueprint clearly, the act of building becomes inevitable. Once you can read the symbolic map, one of the most potent symbols you will encounter, both in Scripture and in your daily life, is the phrase, "I am." This is not casual language. It is not the same as saying, "I'm hungry," or "I'm tired" in the passing stream of conversation. The "I am" is the root statement of identity, the command that sets your mental machinery into motion. Every time you use it, consciously or not, you issue a directive to the subconscious about who you are and what reality you will experience. Emmet Fox and the metaphysical teachers of his era made this point with urgency. Never speak "I am" in vain, not in the religious sense of breaking a commandment, but in the practical sense of avoiding self-sabotage. Each "I am" is a blueprint line, a stroke of the pen on the master plan of your life. When you say, "I am unlucky," the mind begins constructing the equivalent in conditions. When you say, "I am resilient," it begins aligning your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to prove that true. The power of "I am" lies in its immediacy. It does not operate on delay. Even if the outer evidence lags, the subconscious receives it now, believes it now, and begins shaping action and perception to match it. That's why it's never enough to tack on a forced positive statement if the dominant "I am" beneath it is negative. Saying "I am confident" while holding an unchallenged belief of "I am unworthy" is like trying to paint over wet cement. It doesn't stick. Your work here is to use "I am" with precision. Not sterile precision, but living precision, words chosen not just for correctness, but for resonance. If you say, "I am strong," let that word draw up a physical memory of strength, a time you felt yourself stand firm. If you say, "I am creative," let your mind instantly connect with the last spark of invention you experienced. The subconscious responds to feeling far more than it responds to empty syllables. It's also essential to see that "I am" statements are not confined to speech. You declare them in your posture, in the way you meet another's eyes, in the choices you make without hesitation. Every silent assumption you carry about yourself is an "I am" in action. If you avoid opportunities because you think, "I am not ready," that thought has already been imprinted, regardless of whether you ever spoke it aloud. This is where reading Scripture through the "I am" lens becomes transformative. When you encounter a character making a declaration, whether bold or defeated, ask yourself, what "I am" is being claimed here? And then, just as critically, ask, what "I am" I claiming in this situation of my own life? The parallel will often be startling. Fox emphasized that "I am" is the name of your spiritual authority, the point where the universal principle and your individual consciousness meet. To misuse it is to misdirect your own power. To use it well is to set creation in motion deliberately. And because the law is impartial, it will fulfill whatever you stamp with that authority. Of course, this doesn't mean you must police every stray thought in fear. The mind produces thousands of idle phrases each day, and most pass without deep impression. What matters is the "I am" you repeat, the ones you accept as fact and return to again and again. Those are the ones that set the tone of your life. One practical way to strengthen your "I am" is to treat it as a contract. You would never sign a contract without reading it. Likewise, do not sign your mental name to statements that diminish you. If an "I am" comes up that you do not wish to keep, amend it immediately, not with frantic denial, but with calm redefinition. Replace "I am overwhelmed" with "I am reorganizing." Replace "I am stuck" with "I am clarifying my next step." Over time, this deliberate use reshapes not only your vocabulary, but your perception. You begin to see how others use "I am" unconsciously to lock themselves into struggle, and you quietly choose differently. You stop joining in conversations built on "I am always broke" or "I am terrible with people," because you know the cost of that agreement. The most liberating part is realizing that you are not bound to any "I am" you've ever spoken. Identity is fluid when approached through principle. You can withdraw an old claim and issue a new one at any moment. The shift may not erase past effects instantly, but it will begin generating a new sequence of causes, and that is all you need to set change in motion. When you use "I am" with clarity and conviction, you step into conscious authorship of your life. You are no longer chasing outcomes or begging for circumstances to improve. You are defining yourself and letting the outer adjust accordingly. And, as Fox would remind you, the outer always does. Once you grasp the force behind "I am," the next natural step is to see how cause and effect weave through every layer of your life and how living clean, inside and out, keeps that cause and effect chain working for you instead of against you. In Emmet Fox's view, cause and effect is not some abstract cosmic principle that only applies in grand spiritual matters. It operates in every interaction, every habit, every private thought. The challenge is that most people treat cause and effect as if it were random blaming luck when results are good and blaming circumstances when they are not. But if you are to live with deliberate power, you must see that every effect has a cause, and that the causes you set in motion today will inevitably return to you, often magnified. Living clean begins with this acknowledgement. It's not moral posturing or a checklist of virtues. It's about removing the static from your own mental field so that your chosen causes can express themselves without interference. When your inner life is cluttered with resentment, self-justification, or double-dealing, your causes carry that distortion into the results. The effect may still arrive, but it will be tangled with consequences you did not intend. This is why Fox placed such emphasis on aligning your inner state with the principles you claim to live by. If you say you want harmony, but your inner dialogue is full of criticism and cynicism, you are planting mixed seeds. One part of your mind is aiming for growth, the other is salting the soil. The result will be uneven not because the principle failed, but because you issued contradictory causes. Clean living in this context means consistency between what you hold inwardly and what you project outwardly. It means that if you desire abundance, you refuse to indulge in casual talk about lack, not just in public, but when you're alone. If you want trust, you stop bending truth in small matters, because those small distortions set causes in motion just as surely as larger ones. Of course, this is not about perfection. You will still find yourself slipping into old reactions. The difference is that now you catch them sooner. You correct them before they gain momentum. You stop defending habits that no longer serve you. Over time, this vigilance becomes part of your natural rhythm, like cleaning the dust from a window so the light comes through clear. Understanding cause and effect also removes the temptation to believe in getting away with something. There is no escaping law not because it's watching to punish you, but because it is built into the structure of life itself. Every thought and action is a seed. Every seed has a harvest. The only real question is, will you be glad when it comes? This awareness has a liberating side as well. If every cause produces an effect, then every small, positive cause you set in motion is inevitable in its return. You do not have to strain for results or watch the clock. You simply plant with care and keep the ground in order. The effect will arrive in its season, sometimes through channels you never could have predicted. Fox often warned against the mental habit of sending out one cause while expecting the opposite effect. You cannot plant resentment and harvest peace. You cannot plant doubt and harvest confidence. This is why he urged students to check their motives before acting, to make sure the cause itself is clean, free of hidden agendas, fear, or resentment. If the cause is sound, the effect will be sound. One of the most practical ways to live clean is to keep short accounts with yourself and others. If you know you have acted out of alignment, correct it quickly. Apologize, make amends, or reset your intention. Do not let unresolved tensions fester. They drain energy and cloud perception, which in turn distorts future causes. You may notice that as you commit to cleaner causes, some people or situations begin to fall away. This is not loss, it is pruning. When you stop feeding energy into patterns of conflict, those patterns wither. The relationships and conditions that remain will be those that can coexist with your new level of clarity. And perhaps the most striking change is internal. You start to trust yourself more. You know that your word, even to yourself, carries weight. You feel less need to second-guess your actions because you've already measured them against the principle of clean cause. You rest easier in the knowledge that the effects ahead, whatever form they take, will be true to your intention. This is not a life of rigid self-policing, it is a life of steady self-respect. You stop throwing pebbles into the pond just to see what ripples they make, because you know every ripple moves the whole surface. You choose your stones with care, place them with purpose, and watch as the pattern spreads in harmony with your design. In this way, cause and effect becomes not a rule to fear, but a craft to master. And clean living is the discipline that keeps your craft precise. With each choice aligned, each seed planted with care, you build a life whose harvest you can welcome without hesitation. When cause and effect are clear in your mind, you naturally begin to see the value of tools that keep your inner state steady and aligned. For Emmet Fox, one of the most practical and immediately usable tools was scientific prayer, especially as distilled in his well-known practice called the Golden Key. It is both deceptively simple and profoundly transformative, because it directly interrupts the tendency to fixate on the problem and trains you to give your full attention to principle. Scientific prayer, as Fox taught it, is not begging, pleading, or trying to persuade some external power to intervene. It is a deliberate act of aligning your thought with the truth of the situation as seen through spiritual law. You are not here to convince the universe to care. You are here to remind yourself of what is already true in the structure of reality, and to hold that truth steadily until your feeling and action match it. The Golden Key is his shorthand method for doing exactly that. When you are faced with a problem, whether it's a bill you don't know how to pay, a relationship conflict, a health challenge, or a surge of anxiety, the instruction is to stop thinking about the problem entirely and think instead about God. Not God as a figure of doctrine, but God as the universal principle, order, intelligence, life, love. You turn your mind away from the condition and place it fully on the nature of that principle. In practice, this means that each time your mind wants to run the problem, you turn the key and think instead of the qualities of the principle. If you're afraid, you think of the steadiness of truth. If you feel lack, you think of the sufficiency of life. If you're confused, you think of the clarity and intelligence always present. You keep turning your attention back, over and over, until the emotional charge around the problem starts to dissolve. This is not denial. You are not pretending the condition doesn't exist. You are refusing to feed it with energy. You are cutting off the mental supply line that keeps the problem vivid in your awareness. In doing so, you create the mental equivalent of the solution. The subconscious responds to the new dominant image, and cause and effect begin shifting in your favor. Fox emphasized that scientific prayer works best when it is specific in feeling, but general in form. You do not outline exactly how the solution must come. You hold firmly to the truth that the principle at the core of life can only express harmony, order, and sufficiency and then you let that truth find its own expression through channels you may not anticipate. The discipline here is in holding the thought long enough for it to imprint. A fleeting moment of focus will not outweigh hours of worry. This is why the golden key can feel awkward at first. Your mind is used to rehearsing the problem, so it will try to wander back repeatedly. Your job is to keep turning it, without strain, as often as necessary. Some days this may mean keying back dozens of times in an hour. Other days, the shift will come quickly and hold. Over time, this practice reshapes your reflexes. Instead of spiraling deeper into analysis or fear when a challenge arises, you instinctively look for the principle behind it. You stop asking, "Why is this happening?" and start asking, "What truth here is unshakable, regardless of appearances?" That shift alone changes your energy, your choices, and your openness to unexpected solutions. Scientific prayer also refines your use of "I am." If you have been careful to keep your identity statements aligned, the golden key gives you a way to back them with steady emotion. You are no longer trying to believe through sheer willpower. You are letting the feeling of truth grow naturally as you rest your attention on it. The most telling measure of this method's effectiveness is not just in the outer changes it brings, though those will come, but in the inner composure it develops. You begin to notice that your mind is less reactive, that you recover from shocks more quickly, that you can hold a sense of order even in the middle of apparent chaos. That composure is not passivity, it is readiness. It means you can act decisively without being driven by fear. Eventually, you find that the golden key is not something you only use in emergencies. It becomes a constant background discipline, a habit of returning your attention to principle in ordinary moments. You use it while waiting in line, walking to your car, sitting before a meeting starts. You are training your mind to live in the atmosphere of truth so fully that when a real test comes, the reflex is already set. And this is the quiet genius of Fox's method. It works without drama. There are no elaborate rituals, no reliance on special conditions. The power is in the shift of attention, repeated until it becomes the dominant state. You learn to let go of the urge to control the outcome, and instead, you keep the cause, your inner alignment, clean and strong. From there, the effect cannot help but follow. When you live by cause and effect and keep your focus aligned through practices like scientific prayer, you inevitably confront one of the most potent tests of spiritual maturity: forgiveness. Emmet Fox saw forgiveness not as an optional moral gesture, but as a necessary act to free creative power. Until you release resentment, part of your mind remains locked in the past, feeding energy into a pattern that will keep reproducing itself. Forgiveness, in this framework, is not about excusing harmful behavior or pretending events didn't happen. It's about cutting the energetic tether that binds you to the memory of injury. As long as you rehearse the grievance, replaying the words, the expressions, the unfairness, you are reinforcing the mental equivalent of being wronged. And because law is impartial, that equivalent will keep finding ways to express itself in your life. Fox often reminded his listeners that resentment is like holding a live coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. You burn yourself first. It doesn't matter if the other person ever knows you've forgiven them. The essential work is internal. Forgiveness releases your own mind from the loop, so you can direct that energy toward what you want to create next. The act of forgiveness begins with recognizing how much it costs you to hold on to resentment. Every time you recall the offense, your nervous system reacts as if it's happening again. Your muscles tighten, your breathing changes, your mood shifts. This is energy you could be spending on building new equivalence, clarifying vision, or enjoying the present moment. Instead, it's tied up in keeping an old story alive. Some resist forgiveness because they fear it will make them vulnerable again, as if letting go means lowering their guard. But Fox distinguished clearly between forgiveness and boundary setting. You can forgive fully and still choose not to allow someone access to your life. Forgiveness clears the inner slate. Boundaries protect the outer space. One does not cancel the other. A practical way to begin is to separate the person from the pattern. See their hurtful action as the product of a mistaken belief, an unresolved fear, or a distorted equivalent they are carrying. This doesn't justify the action, it contextualizes it. By doing this, you loosen the personal sting and make space for a broader view. Here is a human being acting from a state of mind they have not yet outgrown. From there, you can deliberately withdraw your mental attention from the offense. When the thought arises, and it will, you acknowledge it without feeding it, much like with the golden key. You replace it with an image or statement of release. I set you free, and I am free. The repetition is not magic in itself. It's the steady reconditioning of your focus away from the injury and toward neutrality. The effects of true forgiveness often show up quietly. You may notice you think of the person less often, or when you do, the emotional charge is gone. You might find your own projects moving forward with more ease, as if a weight has been lifted. Sometimes, the external relationship even shifts, though this is not the goal. The goal is always the liberation of your own mind. Fox also linked forgiveness directly to prosperity. A mind cluttered with grievances is a poor conductor for the flow of good. Just as blocked plumbing prevents water from moving freely, blocked emotional channels prevent the steady circulation of opportunities, ideas, and resources. Clearing those channels is as practical as repairing a pipe. It restores flow. There's a deeper layer here as well: self-forgiveness. Many people can extend grace to others, but continue to punish themselves for past errors. This is just another form of holding resentment, except now the coal is pressed against your own skin. The same principles apply. Separate the action from your core identity. See the mistake as a product of a state of mind you've since outgrown. Withdraw your attention from it. Replace it with a vision of yourself acting from clarity and strength now. Forgiveness is not a one-time declaration. It's a practice. Some offenses are like shallow splinters. You remove them once and they're gone. Others are like deep wounds that require repeated tending before they fully heal. Each time you choose release over rehearsal, the grip loosens a little more. And the reward is unmistakable. Energy returns, creativity stirs, and a quiet spaciousness opens in your mind. You are no longer split between past and present. Your full attention is available to the causes you're setting in motion now. In that space, the future takes shape not as a repetition of old injuries, but as a clean field where new patterns can take root. With forgiveness clearing the old weight from your mind, you now stand in a position to use one of the most creative forces available to you: imagination disciplined by faith. Emmet Fox described faith not as a vague hope or blind trust, but as the ability to hold a chosen mental picture steady until it becomes the dominant pattern in your mind. Imagination provides the picture. Faith keeps it in place until the law of cause and effect brings it into form. Most people imagine constantly, but without discipline. They let their minds drift into scenarios of failure, embarrassment, loss, or disappointment, and then are surprised when life reflects those pictures. The undirected imagination is like a projector playing whatever film happens to be loaded, regardless of whether it's inspiring or destructive. Disciplined imagination is different. You choose the film. You decide what images will run, what scenes will repeat, and what emotional tone will accompany them. You treat imagination as a tool of construction, not as an escape or an outlet for anxiety. And then, through faith, you hold that picture not with clenched fists, but with steady certainty until it takes root. Fox often encouraged students to rehearse their desired scene as if it were already complete. If you are seeking improved health, you imagine yourself moving with energy, your body functioning smoothly, your expression calm and alive. If you are working toward a goal in business, you picture the end result, the contract signed, the project launched, the success shared, without obsessing over every detail of how it happened. You feel the satisfaction now, as if you were describing something already familiar. This "as if" is not pretense. It is the way the subconscious learns. The mind does not distinguish sharply between a vividly imagined event and one physically experienced. If you consistently feed it the feeling of the fulfilled state, it begins to adjust beliefs, habits, and even physical responses to match that state. That adjustment, in turn, shapes your actions and perceptions in ways that make the imagined outcome more likely. Faith is what keeps the image intact when outer evidence appears to contradict it. Without faith, imagination collapses at the first sign of delay. The mind slips back into old pictures, and the cause you were nurturing is cut off before it can bear fruit. Faith is the willingness to keep tending the mental garden even when the soil still looks bare. This is not stubbornness for its own sake, it is alignment with law. You know that if the mental equivalent is held clearly and without contradiction, the outer must adjust. Faith says, "I will not dig up the seed to see if it's growing. I will keep the soil healthy, and the seed will do its work." Discipline here means two things. First, you protect the image from interference. That means you limit conversations, media, and environments that plant seeds of doubt. You can still engage with the world, but you remain conscious of what you allow to take root in your mind. Second, you feed the image regularly, not only when you feel inspired, but as a matter of habit. Even a few minutes of vivid, feeling-filled rehearsal each day can keep the picture alive and vibrant. Fox also warned against scattering your focus. If you plant a dozen different seeds and tend them all half-heartedly, your results will be weak. Choose what matters most and commit to it. Once that is established, you can plant the next. The discipline of imagination works best when it is directed, concentrated, and consistent. Over time, something subtle shifts. The imagined state begins to feel more real to you than the old patterns ever did. You start noticing opportunities that align with your vision, sometimes in the smallest details, a casual remark from a friend, a book you happen to see, a chance encounter. Because your mind is tuned to the picture, you recognize these openings instantly and act on them. And this is where imagination and faith intertwine. Imagination gives you the scene. Faith gives you the stamina to live in it mentally until it becomes the scene you are living physically. When these two forces work together, the distance between inner and outer collapses. Disciplined imagination is not daydreaming, it is deliberate creation. And faith is not passive waiting, it is active participation in the unfolding of your own cause and effect chain. Together, they make you not just a reader of the blueprint, but a builder who can see the finished structure while the foundation is still being laid. As your imagination and faith become steady partners, life will inevitably present you with tests, moments when the outer picture appears to contradict everything you have been building within. Emmet Fox referred to these not as punishments or random hardships, but as training grounds. They are the proving fields where your inner stance is refined, your skill deepened, and your capacity expanded. A trial, seen through the old lens, is something to be endured until it passes. Seen through the spiritual lens, it is a deliberate invitation to demonstrate mastery of the principles you've been studying. The difference lies in how you meet it. If you approach it as an interruption to your growth, you resist, complain, and often regress into the very patterns you've been working to outgrow. But if you approach it as training, you lean in not to suffer more, but to extract the lesson that will make you stronger on the other side. The purpose of these training grounds is not to test whether you deserve success, peace, or fulfillment. Law is impersonal. It does not withhold good based on merit. Rather, trials expose where your alignment is still shaky. They reveal the reflexive beliefs and reactions that have not yet been brought under conscious direction. They show you exactly where to focus your next round of work. Consider the moment when something you have been affirming seems to hit a wall. You've held the mental equivalent, you've applied forgiveness, you've practiced the golden key, and yet a new obstacle appears. The untrained mind calls this a failure. The trained mind recognizes it as an opportunity to deepen conviction. The obstacle is the weight on the barbell. Lifting it strengthens the muscle. Without resistance, the muscle never grows. Fox often reminded his audiences that the difference between a master and a novice is not the absence of challenge, but the response to it. The master treats every trial as a chance to prove the law works, not in theory, not in comfort, but in the heat of the moment. This doesn't mean you enjoy the discomfort. It means you value the transformation it demands. Training grounds can take many forms. Sometimes they come as delays, forcing you to hold your vision longer than you expected, to keep faith without immediate reinforcement. Other times they arrive as conflicts in relationships, calling you to practice clarity, compassion, and boundary setting under pressure. They can appear in the form of sudden loss, unexpected expense, or physical challenge, all of which confront you with the question, will you interpret this through the lens of fear or through the lens of principle? The key is to resist the urge to dramatize. Trials are not omens of doom. They are simply the conditions under which the next level of your capacity is forged. When you remove the emotional label of disaster and replace it with training, you free up the energy that would otherwise be wasted on panic or self-pity. That energy can then be directed toward constructive action and sustained alignment. Another shift that helps is to frame the trial in terms of skill. Ask yourself, what specific skill of mind or heart is this situation asking me to develop? Patience, precision in thought, emotional steadiness, creative problem solving? This question moves you from a defensive stance to an active one. You stop waiting for the storm to pass and start steering the ship. Over time, you'll notice that trials become less intimidating not because they disappear, but because you no longer see them as threats to your foundation. In fact, you start to welcome them in a quiet way, knowing each one, if met well, will leave you stronger, clearer, and more capable. And here's the paradox. The more you treat challenges as training grounds, the less frequently they appear in their harsher forms. As your responses become more aligned, life no longer needs to press as hard to show you where the work is. Lessons arrive in subtler ways through intuition, small corrections, and gentle nudges instead of heavy shocks. In this way, trials are not detours from the path. They are the path, sharpening your tools and tempering your will. Every time you choose to see them this way, you reinforce the mental equivalent of someone who is not easily shaken, who can stand steady in both calm and storm. That stance, more than any outer condition, is what makes your progress irreversible. As you grow steadier in trials, another mirror begins to reveal itself with startling clarity. Your relationships. Emmet Fox taught that the people around you are often the clearest indicators of the patterns you hold within. They are not accidents in your life. They are reflections, sometimes bright, sometimes painfully sharp, of your own mental equivalents, beliefs, and attitudes. When you see relationships through this lens, you stop treating them as isolated dramas. You start asking, what in me is being mirrored here? What belief is this interaction revealing? This doesn't mean you take blame for other people's actions. It means you acknowledge that how you interpret, react to, and engage with others is always shaped by your own inner blueprint. Some relationships will reflect the best of you: respect, warmth, trust, and mutual growth. Others will press on your unresolved edges, showing you where fear, insecurity, or old narratives still linger. The point is not to eliminate people until only the agreeable ones remain. It is to use each connection as a practice ground for clarity, self-respect, and compassion. One of the first skills to cultivate here is reading projection. We all project, placing onto others qualities or motives that are actually coming from within us. Sometimes projection makes us blind to someone's value. Other times it blinds us to a danger. If you find yourself reacting strongly to a trait in someone, pause to ask whether you are seeing them as they are or whether you are looking at a piece of yourself, something you admire but haven't claimed, or something you reject but still carry. Boundaries are the next essential element. Fox made it clear that love does not mean tolerating destructive behavior. Boundaries are not punishments. They are the structure that allows respect to exist. A relationship without boundaries becomes a place where resentment and mistrust breed. Setting a boundary is a way of saying, "This is the standard for how I will participate," not, "You are wrong for being who you are." Blessing without clinging is another practice that keeps relationships clean. You can appreciate someone's role in your life without trying to own, control, or freeze them in place. When the natural arc of a connection has reached its end, you can release it with gratitude instead of bitterness. This doesn't mean you won't feel loss. It means you won't let loss turn into self-imprisonment. Interpreting relationships as mirrors also means taking responsibility for the energy you bring. If you approach people expecting disappointment, you will unconsciously behave in ways that draw it out. If you approach with an open but grounded stance, you increase the likelihood of mutual respect. Your mental equivalent of "how people treat me" is always in play, shaping your tone, your body language, and the signals you send. Fox urged his students to bless others, not as a sentimental gesture, but as a deliberate act of mental hygiene. When you bless someone in thought, you align yourself with the truth of their potential rather than the limitation they may currently express. This doesn't mean ignoring their faults. It means choosing to direct your creative power toward their highest possibility instead of their lowest behavior. The most challenging relationships are often the most valuable mirrors. They can bring up frustration, impatience, or defensiveness that you thought you'd resolved. They may show you precisely where your forgiveness practice still needs strengthening or where your boundaries need reinforcing. If you meet these relationships consciously, they become catalysts for growth rather than endless loops of conflict. Over time, you'll notice a shift. As your inner state becomes cleaner and more coherent, the relationships in your life follow suit. Some will deepen in quality, others will quietly drift away. New connections will appear that match your refined mental equivalent. This is not magic, it is the natural adjustment of the outer to the inner. In this way, relationships stop being random sources of joy or pain. They become instruments, sometimes gentle, sometimes bracing, tuning you toward greater truth. And when you can read them clearly, set boundaries confidently, and bless without clinging, you step into a kind of relational freedom that few people ever experience. You are no longer trapped in cycles of blame and disappointment. You are engaged in an ongoing exchange of growth and clarity, mirrored back and forth in ways that enrich everyone involved. Once you understand how relationships mirror your inner state, it becomes easier to see how the same principle applies to another area of life that often stirs anxiety and prosperity. Emmet Fox was adamant that prosperity, in its truest sense, has nothing to do with superstition, lucky charms, or mysterious cosmic favoritism. It is the natural, lawful outcome of an inner atmosphere of sufficiency. When you live in the mental equivalent of abundance, you participate in the steady flow of substance. When you live in the equivalent of scarcity, you experience contraction regardless of how hard you work outwardly. Prosperity begins with a clear definition. For Fox, it was not merely about money, though money is certainly part of it. Prosperity meant having whatever you need when you need it, in the right form and in the right sequence, to carry out your purpose with ease. Sometimes that looks like a bank account growing. Other times it looks like a timely introduction, a needed tool, or an unexpected opening. If your definition of prosperity is too narrow, you may overlook the very supply that's arriving for you. The first step is to treat substance as flow, not as a fixed pile of resources that might run out. Life's supply is like water in a well-fed river. Its movement is constant, but your experience of it depends on the channels you keep open. Fear of lack is like building dams in those channels. The water is still there, but your access to it is restricted by your own mental barriers. One of the simplest ways to remove those barriers is to stop rehearsing the language of scarcity. If you're in the habit of saying, "I can't afford that," or "there's never enough," you are impressing the subconscious with the very pattern you wish to dissolve. This doesn't mean you pretend to have unlimited resources or spend recklessly. It means you replace the language of insufficiency with the language of order and choice. "That's not a priority for me right now," or "I'm directing my resources toward X." Fox also linked prosperity to orderliness. Disorder in your environment often reflects disorder in your thinking, and both can interrupt the smooth flow of supply. Clearing clutter, physical, mental, emotional signals to yourself that you are ready to receive without friction. It also frees energy that can then be applied to creative and productive ends. Gratitude is another cornerstone of prosperity consciousness. This is not the perfunctory listing of blessings in a journal, but the active recognition of supply in motion. When you truly register what is already working, you reinforce the mental equivalent of being supported. You notice opportunities and resources you might otherwise take for granted, and your actions naturally align to expand them. Circulation is equally important. Fox taught that giving, whether in money, time, or skill, should be a deliberate act of participating in the flow. Hoarding out of fear sends the message that supply is limited and must be guarded, which is precisely the message the subconscious will reproduce in your conditions. Giving with discernment affirms that substance is inexhaustible and that you trust your own channels to refill. One common trap is chasing prosperity through superstition rituals, lucky items, or formulas promised to unlock wealth. Fox cut through these illusions by returning to the principle: your outer state will always match your prevailing inner state. A ritual can serve as a reminder, but it has no power apart from the belief you bring to it. Lasting prosperity comes from shifting the belief itself, not from manipulating outer symbols. Working with prosperity through this lens also means refusing to measure it solely by accumulation. The question is not just, "How much do I have?" but how freely does it move in and out? How readily can I access what I need? You might have less stored in the bank, but a far greater capacity to create, attract, and exchange value. This is a truer measure of security than numbers alone. To cultivate this, start small. Identify one area where you can open the channel, perhaps by organizing a space, clearing an old debt, offering help without expectation, or upgrading a tool you use daily. Notice the ease or relief that follows, and treat it as evidence that the flow responds to clarity. Then build from there. Prosperity without superstition is about living in harmony with law, holding the mental equivalent of sufficiency, keeping channels open through order, gratitude, and circulation, and trusting that the same principle that moves the tides and seasons is at work in your affairs. You don't need to manipulate it, you need to align with it. When you do, prosperity stops being a chase and becomes the natural atmosphere in which you operate. With prosperity understood as a natural flow, it becomes easier to see that your body is also part of that flow, not an obstacle, not a burden, but an obedient servant to the mind that directs it. Emmet Fox stressed that while the body has its own intelligence and intricate systems, it responds powerfully to the meanings and instructions you impress upon it. The state of your body is not only the result of physical habits, but also of the mental climate in which those habits take place. This doesn't mean you can simply declare yourself healthy while neglecting physical care. Rather, it means that the body and mind function as one integrated system, and the messages you send mentally have a direct impact on the body's performance, recovery, and resilience. Every instruction, spoken or unspoken, carries weight. Most people are careless in the way they speak about their bodies. They say, "I'm getting old," "My back is killing me," or "I have the worst immune system," without realizing they are issuing repeated commands to the subconscious. Over time, those commands reinforce the very conditions they describe. Fox urged his students to speak to the body as they would to a faithful assistant, clear, respectful, and confident in its ability to carry out the task. Directing the body begins with language, but it extends into imagery and expectation. If you hold a mental picture of yourself as fragile, clumsy, or slow to recover, your body will organize itself around that belief. If you consistently see yourself as strong, coordinated, and responsive, your body will begin to match that picture, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically, by adjusting posture, energy, and even biochemical responses. Of course, physical action remains essential. Nutrition, rest, movement, and recovery are all part of the orders you give the body. But when those actions are paired with a coherent mental directive, the effect is multiplied. Exercise done with resentment or defeat in mind carries a different energy than exercise done with the conviction, I am training my body to serve me well. Food eaten with guilt or fear will not nourish in the same way as food eaten with gratitude and intention. Another key is cooperation rather than domination. Many approach the body as something to be conquered, forcing it into submission through extreme regimens or punishing it for perceived flaws. Fox's perspective was that the body functions best when treated as an ally. Cooperation means listening to its signals, making adjustments when needed, and giving it both challenge and rest in balance. You can think of the nervous system as the communication bridge between your conscious mind and your physical form. When you repeatedly associate certain situations with stress, pain, or weakness, the nervous system becomes conditioned to trigger those responses automatically. By changing the mental associations through reframing, imagery, and steady affirmation, you can retrain those reflexes. Over time, situations that once caused tension or fatigue can become neutral or even energizing. There is also a discipline in refusing to identify with temporary conditions. If you are recovering from illness or injury, it's easy to let "I am sick" or "I am broken" become part of your identity. Fox taught that this reinforces the problem. Instead, you might acknowledge the present state factually, "I am experiencing this symptom," while holding a firm inner picture of the body functioning in full order. This keeps the mental equivalent aligned with health, even while you address the condition with appropriate care. Your cooperation with the body also includes the environment you place it in. The spaces you inhabit, the air you breathe, the sounds you hear all contribute to the signals your body receives. Where possible, choose surroundings that reinforce vitality. Light, movement, fresh air, and even small moments of beauty signal the body to relax and function optimally. Over time, treating the body as an obedient servant changes your relationship with it. You stop seeing it as a limitation and start seeing it as a reliable partner. You notice how quickly it responds to new instructions, how adaptable it is when you give it clear guidance, and how much more energy is available when mind and body are working in harmony. And just as prosperity is not about hoarding but about keeping resources in motion, physical well-being is not about locking the body into a fixed state of perfection. It is about maintaining a responsive, adaptable system that serves your purpose. That means staying attuned, making course corrections without panic, and trusting that the same law which governs mind and environment also governs the body's capacity to heal, strengthen, and renew. When you direct your body with respect, clarity, and trust, it stops being the passive recipient of circumstance. It becomes an active, willing participant in the life you are building, ready to respond, ready to serve, and ready to reflect the wholeness you hold within. With the body understood as an ally, the next dimension to bring into alignment is the work you do in the world, your vocation. Emmet Fox was clear that true success in any field is not merely the result of talent or opportunity, but of aligning your work with an inner directive and delivering it with excellence and a spirit of service. When these three elements, alignment, excellence, and service, are present, Vocation becomes a channel through which both personal fulfillment and contribution to the larger good can flow. Alignment begins with clarity about your inner directive. This is more than what you're good at or what's available right now. It's about sensing where your natural abilities, genuine interests, and the world's needs intersect. Many people spend years chasing roles that look promising on paper but leave them feeling hollow, because the work has no real connection to their deeper purpose. Others remain in work they dislike out of fear of instability, not realizing that misaligned work drains more energy and opportunity over time than the risk of change ever could. Finding alignment does not always mean a dramatic career shift. Sometimes it means reframing how you approach your current role, bringing your values and strengths into it more deliberately, or shifting your focus toward aspects that feel more purposeful. The point is to stop treating work as something separate from your spiritual and mental life. When you view your vocation as an extension of your inner state, you naturally raise your standard for how you show up each day. Excellence is the next pillar. Fox insisted that whatever work you are doing now, whether or not it is your ideal, is the ground on which you demonstrate your readiness for greater opportunities. Excellence is not perfectionism. It is the consistent choice to give your best effort, to refine your skills, and to approach tasks with attention and care. When you make excellence a habit, you train both mind and body to operate at a higher standard, and you send a clear message to yourself and to the law. This is the level at which I function. It's important to understand that excellence is cumulative. Each time you handle a small task with care, you are reinforcing the mental equivalent of someone who can be trusted with greater responsibility. Conversely, when you approach your work with resentment or carelessness, you reinforce the pattern of minimal return, both in outer results and in self-respect. The third pillar, service, is often misunderstood. Service in this context is not about self-sacrifice or ignoring your own needs. It's about recognizing that the work you do exists within a web of interconnection, that your contribution has ripple effects, whether you see them or not. Service means bringing an intention to benefit others into your daily tasks, whether through the quality of your product, the respect you show in interactions, or the solutions you create. When service is genuine, it shifts the energy of your work. It keeps you from becoming self-absorbed in your own advancement and reminds you that your skills have value because they touch real lives. Fox noted that those who work with a spirit of service often find that doors open for them more naturally, not because of luck, but because they become known as people who create real value, and value always attracts opportunity. Of course, aligning vocation, excellence, and service requires ongoing adjustment. There will be seasons where you must reassess whether your current role still reflects your directive. There will be times when excellence demands learning new skills or breaking old habits. There will be days when service feels harder to extend, especially in environments where it isn't reciprocated. But each adjustment strengthens your inner authority and clarifies the path ahead. It's also worth remembering that vocation is not limited to paid employment. The same principles apply to any role in which you consistently invest time and energy, whether as a parent, volunteer, creator, or community leader. Wherever you are placing your attention, the alignment excellence service triad can transform both your experience and your impact. One of the most practical exercises you can apply here is to set a daily intention that links all three pillars. For example, today I will bring focus to specific aspect of work, execute it with full attention, and look for one opportunity to make it more useful or uplifting for someone else. This keeps your work grounded in purpose while maintaining a standard of quality and a conscious connection to those you serve. Over time, this approach changes your relationship with work. Tasks that once felt draining become opportunities to express competence and purpose. Challenges in the workplace become prompts for creativity rather than triggers for frustration. Recognition, advancement, and prosperity follow not as the main goal, but as the natural effect of consistently aligning what you do with who you are becoming. In Fox's framework, vocation is not simply about making a living, it's about making a life that reflects your principles. When your work is an authentic extension of your inner state, when you bring excellence to every level of responsibility, and when you infuse service into your daily actions, you transform your vocation into a living demonstration of the law in action. If your vocation is the arena where alignment, excellence, and service take shape, then your daily rule of practice is the workshop where those qualities are maintained and strengthened. Emmet Fox taught that spiritual and mental progress is not built on occasional bursts of inspiration, but on the steady rhythm of daily practice. A clear, compact routine serves as both a stabilizer and a compass. It keeps your attention aligned when life is calm and brings you back to center when life is turbulent. A daily rule of practice is not about cramming in every possible technique you've ever learned. It's about choosing a handful of core actions that you can sustain, no matter the circumstances. The purpose is to keep your inner state consistent enough that when opportunities arise or challenges strike, you're already in condition to respond with clarity. Fox advised starting with practices that cover 3 essential functions. 1. Stabilizing your thought, so you begin each day with a deliberate mental climate rather than drifting into old patterns. 2. Feeding your inner vision, so you keep the mental equivalent of your goals vivid and emotionally alive. 3. Clearing interference, so you don't carry yesterday's tensions into today's work. A typical morning sequence might include a short period of quiet focus, 5 to 10 minutes, in which you deliberately choose your thought atmosphere for the day. This could be a simple statement like, "Today I walk in order, clarity, and sufficiency." Repeated until you feel its tone settle into you. The point is not repetition for its own sake, but the conscious selection of the weather you will carry in your mind. Next, feed your inner vision. This could mean reviewing a written description of your chosen goals, visualizing them in detail, or recalling moments when you've already lived aspects of that reality. As you do this, engage the senses and feelings what you see, hear, touch, and feel in that fulfilled state. Fox reminded his students that the more vividly you can inhabit the mental equivalent, the faster it imprints on the subconscious. The third step is clearing interference. This can be as simple as identifying one resentment, worry, or doubt that's been lingering and using forgiveness or the golden key to release it. Carrying unaddressed static in your mind is like trying to tune into a station with background noise. It weakens your signal. A quick release in the morning keeps the rest of the day cleaner. Throughout the day, your practice shifts into maintenance mode. Fox encouraged what he called flash practices, brief returns to alignment in the middle of ordinary activity. This might be pausing to recenter before a meeting, silently blessing someone you pass, or replacing a stray negative thought with a deliberate statement of truth. These micro-adjustments prevent small drifts from turning into major deviations. Evenings are a time for review and reset. Without judgment or self-criticism, look back over the day. Where did you hold alignment well? Where did you lose it? What triggered you, and how could you meet it differently next time? This is not about dwelling on mistakes. It's about extracting lessons while the memory is fresh, then letting the day go so you can begin the next one clean. One of the greatest benefits of a daily rule is that it speeds recovery after a slip. No one maintains perfect alignment at all times. The difference between progress and stagnation is the speed with which you return to your chosen state. A solid daily routine means that, even if you lose focus for hours or days, you have a clear pathway back, and the return becomes easier each time. It's also important to protect your practice from the all-or-nothing trap. Life will occasionally disrupt your schedule. Rather than abandoning the whole routine because you missed a step, do a condensed version. Even 2 minutes of intentional focus can keep the habit alive and signal to yourself that you value your inner alignment. Over time, your daily rule of practice becomes less of a conscious checklist and more of an ingrained rhythm. You find yourself thinking in the language of your chosen truths, noticing opportunities faster, and catching yourself before old patterns fully take hold. Others may describe you as lucky or naturally positive, not realizing the steady work you've done to make alignment your default setting. And here lies Fox's deeper point. The daily rule is not just about discipline, it's about freedom. By stabilizing your mind each day, you free yourself from being tossed around by circumstances. By feeding your vision daily, you free yourself from drifting into vague wishes. By clearing interference daily, you free your creative power to flow toward what you truly want. In short, your daily rule of practice is the quiet engine of transformation. It doesn't demand applause or recognition, but it makes every other aspect of your life, relationships, work, health, prosperity, more coherent and more responsive to your direction. It is the unshakable base from which you meet the world. When a daily rule of practice has taken root in your life, something fundamental shifts. You no longer feel as if you're working on yourself in isolated bursts. You are living from the inside out, every day, without break, in continuity. This is what Emmet Fox meant by living unveiled, no longer hiding behind excuses, illusions, or old narratives, but moving through the world steady and true. Living unveiled is not about performing spiritual poise for others. It's about removing the layers that once distorted your perception, fear, resentment, self-doubt, and meeting life without the masks you thought you needed for protection. The more those layers fall away, the more clearly you see both yourself and the principles that govern your experience. One sign you are living unveiled is that your outer life begins to feel like an accurate reflection of your inner state. You no longer experience the same jarring gap between what you intend and what shows up. Your choices, relationships, work, and environment align naturally because they are all flowing from a coherent center. This doesn't mean there are no challenges. It means you meet those challenges without slipping into the old habit of abandoning your truth. Steadiness becomes your natural stance. Instead of waiting for conditions to settle before you feel secure, you carry security into every condition. You trust the law of cause and effect enough to keep planting clean causes even when the harvest is not yet visible. You trust the process of mental equivalence enough to refine them rather than replace them in frustration. And you trust yourself enough to know that a slip is just that, a momentary departure, not a collapse of the whole journey. Living true also means accepting responsibility without self-condemnation. You recognize that your results flow from your own patterns and that those patterns are always within your power to change. This removes the temptation to cast yourself as a victim of chance or of other people's choices. It doesn't mean you ignore injustice or excuse harmful behavior. It means you reclaim your authority to respond in a way that keeps you aligned with principle. As this way of living deepens, your relationship with time changes. You no longer rush in anxiety or stall in procrastination. You move with the pace that the work requires, whether swift or slow. You see that the right moment is not something you wait for, but something you create through readiness. The discipline you've built means you are always in training, so that when opportunity arrives, you can step into it without hesitation. Fox often emphasized that the final test of any spiritual teaching is not in what it promises, but in how it functions under pressure. Living unveiled means you've tested the principles enough to trust them not only in moments of ease, but in moments of disruption. You've seen the golden key dissolve fear, seen forgiveness open blocked channels, seen disciplined imagination shift the course of events. These are not abstract theories to you, they are tools you've proven. In this state, joy takes on a different texture. It's not the fleeting spike of emotion that depends on everything going well. It's a quiet, steady presence that coexists with whatever else is happening. This joy comes from the knowledge that you are aligned with something stable, unchanging, and dependable law itself. And with joy comes humility. You see clearly that the principles you've been using are universal. They were here before you, and will remain after you. Your personal growth is not a badge of superiority, but a natural result of cooperating with what has always been true. Humility keeps you open to learning, willing to adjust, and quick to acknowledge the help and insight you've received from others along the way. From this place, you can look back at the sanctuary you first entered in Section 1 and realize that it was never a place you visited. It was the state of mind you've been cultivating all along. Living unveiled means the doorway is no longer something you have to find. It is the ground you walk on, the air you breathe, the atmosphere you carry with you into every situation. You are steady not because life is predictable, but because your alignment is. You are true not because you've avoided every error, but because you've built the habit of returning to principle after every slip. And as you move forward, you carry the quiet certainty that the same law that brought you here will carry you into whatever comes next without mask, without fear, and without hesitation. Now that the path has been walked from the first threshold to this steady place, it is time to let the pace ease. You have seen how each idea built upon the last, not as disconnected teachings, but as a single current moving through the whole journey. From the sanctuary's quiet doorway to the discipline of daily practice, each step has been a rehearsal in choosing alignment over reaction, principle over impulse, truth over appearance. The aim of this work was never to flood you with more things to remember. It was to help you build a way of seeing a lens you can carry anywhere, through any condition, without needing to stop and wonder whether it still applies. The lens is set now, not because you memorized it, but because you have used it. You've tested it in thought, in feeling, and in action. And by testing it, you've made it yours. If you pause now and look inward, you may notice that what once felt like effort has begun to feel like rhythm. The golden key is not something you do occasionally. It becomes the reflex when fear knocks. Forgiveness is no longer an intimidating hurdle. It is the natural next step when a grievance tries to root itself. The mental equivalent is not a foreign concept. It is simply the way you think about life now. This quiet closing moment is also an opening. You do not need to rush to the next thing. There is no end to this kind of work, only deeper layers of the same truth. Every new challenge, relationship, or goal will arrive as another scene in which to apply what you already know. Each one will sharpen the skills you've built, much like a craftsman becoming more fluid with familiar tools. And so, the most fitting way to finish is with steadiness. Not a burst of emotion, but a calm, grounded readiness for whatever is ahead. Let the stillness you carried into the sanctuary in the very beginning remain with you now, not as a place to retreat to, but as the atmosphere you bring into the world. This is how you keep the path alive, by walking it in the middle of ordinary days, when no one is watching, and when the only witness is the quiet certainty within. You have not just learned principles, you have integrated them into a way of being. And that way of being will speak for itself, in the choices you make, the tone you carry, and the results you consistently bring into form. In that sense, the journey does not end here. It simply continues, unveiled, steady, and true.